The NBA offseason is officially off and running. Just about a couple hours after I dropped the report, digging through kind of the tea leaves, what Paul George is saying, and projecting why I think there's a better chance that he comes to the Sixers than people are getting credit, that door got slammed in our face. We got this report from Shams Charania here, which I do think the wording is worth paying attention to, that he reports that the Philadelphia 76ers' interest in pursuing Paul George has significantly waned in recent days, and the franchise is expected to be aggressive elsewhere with its salary cap flexibility and draft capital leading into next week's NBA draft, sources tell The Athletic and Stadium. So a lot to dig into here. For starters, I'm just shocked by this, that I think it's very strange to pull yourself out of the competition before free agency has even begun. That for them to sign Paul George, you got to get past July 1st, and we still have plenty of time until that being the case. And from the Sixers' perspective, even if they look at it as Paul George is likely to go back to the Clippers, I see no harm in trying to let them pay as much as they possibly will to up the ante for that price tag to be a part of the Sixers running. And on the other side of things, you should want to be involved as many rumors as possible right now. That we know it's not Paul George or bust, that we heard all these different avenues and options that the Sixers have that I'm excited to touch about in a second. But Paul George, to me, is the clear-cut option A for the very reason that you can sign him outright as a free agent. Now, I understand Paul George is not the perfect basketball player, but a guy that averages 22.6 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.5 steals, shot 47.1% from the field last year, 41.3% from three, 6'8", the truest wing that the Sixers would have been able to have in the Joel Embiid era, and a guy that you can outright sign without having to dig into any assets would have been a win for me. Now, there's a couple other angles that I do want to attach this for. I think part of this could be a saving face effort for the Sixers, that maybe they looked at it as, we know he's not coming here. We don't want it to look like we struck out here, that we're just pulling ourselves out of the race. Or maybe this is a situation where they're just trying to throw up a full smoke screen and don't want to be caught for any tampering or anything along those lines. We know that they got punished during the James Harden era really because of PJ Tucker and Daniel House, which is crazy to say there. That we just saw Embiid flirt with Paul George on national television. Maybe they're trying to retract things a little bit here. But there's a couple other angles that I do want to note. And back to the initial Shams report here, part of it that I want to make, I think is definitely worth noting here, is he writes that the franchise is expected to be aggressive elsewhere with its salary cap flexibility and draft capital leading up to next week's NBA draft. And why I think that's notable there is I think that they're letting Paul George and the Clippers hash this out on their own. That the draft will take place before free agency. So that decision with Paul George will be made on their own. And this does give the Sixers time to explore other avenues with a little bit maybe more seriousness than has been the case to this point. Now, if you feel bad about the Sixers being a poorly run organization, I have good news for you because the Chicago Bulls do exist. As we got this trade shortly after, as Alex Caruso is officially traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for Josh Giddey, this is even more heartbreaking to me from the Sixers' perspective than the Paul George news. That Alex Caruso is a tailor-made winning player that has been wasting away in Chicago, and they just got him for the cheap. Now, for the Bulls, to me, this is inexcusable that you've turned down multiple first-round picks for this guy and are just bringing back Josh Giddey. My guess is they're just way higher on Josh Giddey than the public perception, but my honest take on him as a basketball player, with the off-court stuff completely to the side, is I think he's a flawed basketball player that's never going to be a good enough shooter. He's a guy who needs the ball in his hands to create for others. They're looking at him as a bit of this Lonzo Ball replacement, when the difference being that Lonzo Ball could actually shoot the ball from three, and I'm not really optimistic that Giddey can ever make it that way. That Giddey was not capable of being a part of the Thunder playoff rotation, and now they got a guy that absolutely will be an Alex Caruso. Good luck trying to dribble the ball in the half court when Lou Dort and Alex Caruso are flying around, and that's when their other star players like Jalen Williams and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander are plus defensive players as well. The Thunder are the real deal, and in my opinion are one move away from winning the West next year. Now, back to the Sixers conversation here. It's a bummer to miss out on Caruso. That is the type of player they should be targeting as far as a plus role player who can make an impact, but he's not the only one out there. And by the way, I will be going live at 8 o'clock tonight with Cliff Jackson talking about a couple of these players as well as the ongoing things, so make sure to tune in for that or catch the replay on this channel. But for now, let's talk a little bit about these other options. And Kyle Neubeck of PHLY Sports did a nice job kind of reading the tea leaves and putting it in one, because we did get some more news here. And he tweets out that, to recap the buzzworthy stuff so far this week, Brian Windhorst and Jay Williams start the week off, seemingly open the door on OG Anunoby. Brandon Ingram talks are picking up, with the Sixers named as involved by Kelly Iko. Paul George interest reportedly cools, according to Shams. A lot of moving parts here. Now, I will be diving into each of these options in a little bit more in depth in separate videos, but to give kind of the cliff notes and the basic overview here, we know the OG Anunoby situation. And as far as what he brings to the table, this season averaged 14.7 points, 4.2 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 1.4 steals per game, shot 38.2% from three, as well as 45.7% from the corner. Now, his situation, obviously the benefit there would be stealing him away from the New York Knicks. And we remember the heartbreak of this playoffs. I'm sure that's fresh in all of our minds still. There also is the Nick Nurse connection. Obviously, OG played for Nurse when they were both in Toronto. Now, I've heard mixed things about whether or not they even got along. There was a little bit of falling out with Nick Nurse and some of the players towards the exit of his tenure there. Nothing that money can't fix. And if the Sixers come with open purse, I'm sure that those two can work it out. At least by my knowledge, I haven't seen anything super concerning there. But the reality is, do you feel great about giving a max contract to OG Anunoby? Because I'll be the first one to say that I don't. That for all the cons for Paul George, we at least know that we've seen Paul George be a best player on a team in a way that guys like OG Anunoby, I don't know if we're ever going to see. That OG Anunoby, that signing to me would feel like a Tobias Harris 2.0. And with Tobias Harris, like, you were always squinting at it as like, it's not that bad. He's obviously not fit to make up this contract, but whatever. With Paul George, you could look at it as like, okay, this guy is a real deal third star, borderline second star. I don't know if OG Anunoby's in that same type of conversation. Now, there's other names to bring up as well. One of the more common names that has floated around is LeBron James, who certainly has established himself as more than a Tobias Harris. But we also got the news today that JJ Redick has been hired as the Lakers head coach. We know his podcast partner sitting right across the table is LeBron James, and it will be funny to see the content factory crack out of there. But I think that's bad news for the Sixers. And to bring up what LeBron brings to the tables, not that he needs any more recognition. Everyone knows who he is at this point in time. But even at age 39, produced 25.7 points per game, 7.3 rebounds, 8.3 assists, shot 41% from three this year, which is really impressive stuff, 45.7% on corner threes. There should be no doubt that if LeBron James were available, these Sixers should be all over it. But that feels like another door that has closed. Now, there are a couple names that have been brought into the mix there. We got this report today also saying that the Chicago Bulls have floated out 15 different trade proposals centered around Zack LaVine to the Sacramento Kings, Orlando Magic, and Philadelphia 76ers, per KCJ Hoops. Quote, Zack LaVine's future isn't the only trade scenario that has been discussed. Even if sources said that the general manager has floated as many as 15 proposals centered around the two-time All-Star guard to various teams, including the Sacramento Kings, Orlando Magic, and Philadelphia 76ers. So I'll start by saying I think Zack LaVine's a better player than he gets credit, that I don't think he's this damaged good that he's talked about in a lot of ways, and I think he's a prime candidate for a player that will look much better in a new situation, that he needs a fresh start there. But there's still concerns in his game. And as far as what he produced this year, 19.5 points, 5.2 rebounds, 3.9 assists, shot just 34.9% from three, which was a down year for him, 45.2% from the field overall, 45.2% on corner threes, which is a good number there. He's 6'5", still 29 years old, but he comes with 3 years left on the contract and a guy that has a player option for $49 million at the end. And for me, the real selling point for Zack LaVine, the reason that I was a little bit open-minded with it, was if a guy like Alex Caruso came attached to it. Because there were those rumors that the Bulls are so desperate to get off of that contract that they would have been willing to attach an asset. Now, we know how bad of an organization the Bulls are, and to see Exhibit A from earlier today should not take much more than that. But the Sixers clearly missed the boat here, that you were not able to operate. And now I have way less interest in Zack LaVine if there's not a guy like Caruso coming with him. Because that would have to be the move from a salary cap perspective, that's your all-in push. And while I just spoke very highly of Zack LaVine, I don't feel great about that gamble either. And I get there are the ties here that could make it worth it. He is a Drew Hanlon guy who trains with Joel Embiid. He's a New Balance and Clutch Sports guy, which is the same agency and shoe company that sponsors Tyrese Maxey. They have filmed commercials there, as well as have worked out with Drew Hanlon a little bit, the three of them. So there is some intrigue there from a connection standpoint, but I'm going to really need Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey to vouch for this guy if you're going to make that type of move. Now, another player that there has been a couple whispers on is Brandon Ingram. Now, Brandon Ingram's a little bit of an interesting conversation here. Overall, he averaged 20.8 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, 5.7 assists, which I do think is a notable number there. Shot 49.2% from the field, 35.5% from three. Would prefer that a little bit higher. but he is the youngest of the bunch, 26 years old, about to turn 27. Shot just 35.5% on corner threes, which I do not love there, and 23.8% of his shots being three-pointers is far too low for me. That I am a big believer in the mindset that you need shooters around Joel Embiid specifically, that spacing is the name of the game to maximize this team, and Brandon Ingram falls into the Tobias Harris type category where he's going to pump fake out of three-pointers and take long contested twos. Now, to be a little optimistic about that, I think there is some truth to Brandon Ingram not being a fit and what they have going on in New Orleans, that I think him and Zion Williamson operate some of the same space. I think CJ McCollum and Trey Murphy have become the three-point bombers, which is kind of taking that responsibility out of Ingram's hands to an extent. And if you flash back just 2 seasons, that he was attempting over 6 three-point attempts per game, that's a much better number there. But he's still not a guy that I've seen it, that he's ready to be a number 2 or a number 3 option on a championship team. So he would be taking a swing here as well. And once again, to refer it back to the Paul George conversation, is Paul George was the only guy that you can outright sign. But all these other, and LeBron to an extent, OG to an extent, although there's kind of some ties to each of those as well. But Ingram is a guy that you straight up have to trade for. Zack LaVine is a guy that you straight up have to trade for, and that means digging into those assets, giving up the draft picks, and the Sixers would have to sign players or sign and trade players to try and get the money to work right. So there's some hurdles to clear in each of these situations. So for the Sixers, while I'm happy that the NBA is off and moving, that we finally got some actual news rather than speculation, I don't love the way that either of these shook out. That option A for me as a postseason or as an offseason was for them to walk away with a starting lineup, something along the lines of Tyrese Maxey, Alex Caruso, Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Nico Batum, or Kelly Oubre, whoever your preference is there. Well, the top 2 options there are now off the board. So for Daryl Morey, it's time to get creative and figure this out. There better be a lot going on behind the scenes. I do once again just want to refer to this report and talk about how strange it is for me to see the Sixers pull themselves out of the race really before things even got started. I do find it very odd, particularly after we've seen Joel Embiid talk on public television, basically flirting with Paul George and telling him that he wants him. All these other comments that are coming out on the podcast and various reporters, it just feels strange to see the door shut like that. So I'm still wrapping my head around it. As I mentioned, I will be live at 8 o'clock, so make sure to tune in for some more in-depth thoughts there. Also, make sure that you are liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and dropping any comments that you do have below. I apologize for hitting you with back-to-back Paul George videos. Again, this news broke just shortly after I recorded the first one, so I wanted to make sure I got out with an update here. Appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in. As always, appreciate the support for the channel, and talk with you next time. Peace.